Hi, newly admitted SCaRP students. My name's Gregory Randolph. I'm an assistant professor at the School of City and Regional Planning at Georgia Tech. First of all, congratulations on being admitted to the program. We're really excited to get to know you better, to learn more about your interests and your passions and the experiences that you bring with you to the field of planning. And I thought that I would introduce myself by telling you a little bit about my own journey into planning, partly because it's a bit unconventional. Around 10 years ago, I co-founded a policy research organization called the Just Jobs Network, which is based in India and works around issues of labor and employment and advises governments around the global south on these issues. And as I was building this organization and doing this work, I was based in New Delhi, which is one of the world's largest and most complicated and most dynamic cities. And I noticed this disconnect between how communities and labor markets actually functioned on the ground in the city and how policymakers and planners were trying to shape and reshape the built environment, trying to govern the process of physical urbanization. And an interest in this disconnect is what led me ultimately to come back to the US and pursue a PhD in planning, and what ultimately led me to Georgia Tech. I started in the fall of 2023. So the big picture question that motivates my research is how urbanization looks different in the 21st century under the specific economic and labor market conditions that we have today, which are different from those of the past. And I'm also interested in how urbanization is shaped by the other transitions that we're living through around technological change and climate and energy transition. I've worked on these issues not only in India, but also in other parts of the global south. I've consulted for the World Bank on issues of sustainable development, but I've also worked on these issues in American cities. During my PhD, I was a policy advisor to a city council member in Los Angeles around these same issues of inclusive economic development. At Georgia Tech, I'm affiliated with two different specializations, the Housing and Community Development specialization, as well as the Global Development specialization. So if you're interested in either of those pathways, I would love to talk to you about your interests and the kind of career pathway that you'd like to create. I teach courses at Georgia Tech around community economic development, around global urbanization, and also around public engagement. And if you come here this fall, you'll be required to take one of my classes called Community Dynamics and Engagement. In that class, we look at how communities organize and mobilize themselves, how their voices are sometimes reflected, but often not reflected in planning processes. And we look at strategies that planners can use to better engage communities and better integrate their voices into the planning process, especially to integrate the voices of community members that have often been marginalized. To give you a sense of the kind of student projects that I advise, I'll tell you about two projects that I've advised recently. In one project, one of my students is really interrogating the way that affordability is defined in the context of affordable housing projects in Atlanta and around the US, and coming up with a better metric, a better measure for how we can measure and define affordability, one that's more inclusive. In another project, one of my students is looking at the environmental justice issues around a particular regional airport in Los Angeles and proposing strategies to redevelop the site that would be better and more beneficial for the local community. And I'll close with a little bit of a fun fact about me, which is that on two different occasions in the course of my professional life, I've actually had to learn how to operate a new mode of transport in order to reach the locations where I'm doing my work. The first time this happened was many years ago, over 15 years ago. I was working on a National Geographic film in Mongolia, and in order to reach the communities that we were filming, these were nomadic communities, I actually had to learn how to ride a horse. It was the only mode of transport that could get us there, and I had never done that before. And Mongolian horses are particularly painful to ride because of something called the Mongol trot, which I'll let you imagine. And the second time this happened was more recently in India. I was doing my dissertation fieldwork in a state called Bihar, and I was working in villages that are urbanizing and going through an urban transition. And I had to actually learn how to ride a motorbike because it was the only mode of transport that could get us to these villages. So 2 different occasions, 2 different countries, but a new mode of transport in both cases. So I'll close there, but I just want to reiterate that we are really looking forward to getting to know all of you, and we really hope that you'll join us here this fall at Georgia Tech. Thanks.